Hey there, folks. My name's Thomas Page from the Transgender Rights Movement, and I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the ways that I have come to some of the spaces that I have as a trans activist, and why these things are really important to me. So I'm just going to read something to you that I wrote, so excuse me for looking down for most of this, but I hope that some of what I have to say will resonate with some folks. My name is Thomas. I'm a 35-year-old transgender man. This means that I was born a female back in 1981. When I was around 5 years old, not only the thought that I was attracted to women, but also the realization that I was a boy was the most prevalent feeling that I had. The first thing I tried to do to remedy this situation was to ask my mother the question that at the time in our small farm town was the hardest to ask and the scariest to respond to. Can I be a boy when I grow up? The way that she bit her cheek and said a simple no, to me at the time confirmed that whatever I was thinking, it was the wrong thing. This was not my mother's fault. She had no idea what a transgender person was. And I was the third of 5 of her born daughters. I caught her off guard, and she didn't have the resources to understand what I was asking. Time moved on through my childhood. There was the bullying, the name-calling, the ignorance, and contempt of my peers. They also did not understand, and this is also not their fault. Back in those days, you didn't question things like gender identity. You just fought over the dress at Easter, and maybe over Christmas, and you did your best to look the part. I never was successful at this. When I entered college, I finally felt some freedom from the place where I grew up. I didn't understand how small the mind of my community was, and that there was a whole other world out there. Many of my LGBT peers at the beginning of college didn't feel the need to hide. In fact, they had supportive communities rallying around them and didn't understand why I did not. So it became my freshman year of college. My little sister got a kick out of helping me cut off my hair for the first time, for real. I started college with the same feeling of not belonging that I'd always had. I felt a little better, but I still wasn't able to really be me the way that I wanted. This wouldn't happen for several more years, and it would end up being a terrifying struggle, where I had to lose everyone and everything to be myself. A reprieve came when our RA, or resident assistant, who I really looked up to, finally took me aside and told me their big secret. I'll never forget the air on my face in the dark, sitting there on campus with my friend, having him tell me, with fear in his voice, that he was a transgender man and that he was going to go on hormones and change his name in the near future. He paused and said to me, "I understand if this upsets you. It does upset some of the other residents, and they're having a hard time with it." And I stopped him there. I said, "This doesn't bother me at all. In fact, this is the first time that I can tell someone that I feel exactly the same way. Suddenly, what seemed like a godsend, out of nowhere, happened to this little farm kid. I finally had a big brother. And I knew he had my best interest at heart. From that point on, he chose to be my source of understanding. Another big piece of my story came when he gave me a copy of Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg, who was his hero. Feinberg was not his hero just because they were a trans man, but also because they stood up for everyone who is in a marginalized space. Feinberg went on to fight the good fight and to really make a mark up until the moment they were no longer here to speak in a physical sense. My friend warned me about reading the book, saying, "When I first read this book, I cried through it because I believed that my life would be all of the most horrible and difficult parts of the story." I understood this well after reading the book. I was in agreement. It was a hard read. It also changed me and put the seed of activism in my heart. Many years later, after my own transition, with many stories during this span of time, I found myself out in Los Angeles, California, where I still reside and where I started to gain some true understanding of trans activism. I was led by some of the most powerful transgender women in our community who encouraged me as a trans man to not stay in the shadows. That's important. Fast forward a few more years, and I found myself the victim of a brutal beating that cost me quite a lot, physically and emotionally. This was what seems like a random act of anger by some people against me on the street, and left me with 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and other injuries. I had already begun my work, but the mandatory space of healing that resulted from my injuries lent a lot of time to rebuild and reflect. I built myself up stronger. I kept Leslie Feinberg and their principles in my heart and mind as I forced myself over the course of an hour or so each day to get to a sitting, then standing position from my bed, and to get to my office chair where I could work. The strength of my organization right now, the Transgender Rights Movement, is a direct consequence of having no other choice but to fight for myself. I could feel my bones crunching each day, and there was no one but me to get me through it and stand up. I spent this 6 months building my organization to help transgender community members with a vigor I'd never had before. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. I am a person that believes that the struggles of those before us always give us the strength, not just to survive, but to thrive. Today, I am here in every waking moment, trying to have a dialogue with the community, with allies, and with people who may not understand, but have the desire to do so. The important thing that I get from my reading of Leslie Feinberg is that none of this has happened by accident. Some of the people that struggle in our society are given the opportunity to stand up for our peers, and it usually comes from a harder place. There is no progress without pain, sweat, and tears. I promise this is the last page. I hope that my experience can lend courage to more of my brothers and sisters. Some will say that the experiences that transgender people face are so hard to overcome that it's impossible to be who you want to be in this world. I disagree. I believe that these challenges are exactly what make every community member in any group of people the valuable souls that are required to teach the world.